The lesson we're about to hear is one of the most familiar to Christians. If you have been in church, you have heard this many times. And so I wondered to myself, do you have a top 10 list? Do you have a top 3 list? Would this be on it? And I also thought, with how familiar this parable is to me, recently I was with a woman my own age who had never heard it before. And she was in a time of feeling unsatisfied with the way she was living. She was struggling to believe that God, if there was a God, could love her. And I read her this parable. And it was amazing to watch her puzzle over it and wonder what it might mean for her, who she might be in the parable, who God might be in this story. So I pray that today as we hear it, however many times you may have heard it, that God may allow us to puzzle over it anew. The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to Luke. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So Jesus told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" The gospel of the Lord. As you puzzle over it, who are you in this parable today? My dad used to say of a book or a movie, he would say, I didn't enjoy that. I couldn't associate with anyone in the story. But there's at least three main characters to associate with in this story today. The father, the older son, the younger son. The son who runs off, called the prodigal son, the son who runs off, he asks for his inheritance before his dad is dead, which is another way of saying, I kind of wish you were already gone. And he runs off, lives crudely and for himself, ending up in the lowest of jobs. In Judaism, pigs are an unclean animal. And then finally, he comes dragging himself home in a mess. So what else am I missing? What else do you know about this son from your life? What else do you see in this youngest son who runs off and comes home? If you're online, you can unmute too. He's probably ashamed. Thank you. What else? Carpe diem. He wants what he wants, and he wants it now, and he asks for it, and he goes and he tries it out. When it doesn't work, he tries the next thing. Yeah, what else do you know about this son? He's perfectly imperfect. The youngest son. There's also the son who stays to work. He's loyal to his father, a hard worker. All that his father has is his. He's been working like a slave. I thought maybe if he'd been working with a different spirit, he might have a different response when his brother comes home. He's been working like a slave, so he's ready to be resentful. Maybe he could have been ready to reconcile if he had had a different posture about things. And also I thought, the other son, the younger son, asked for half the inheritance and received it immediately. This son, if he wanted a party with his friends, maybe he could have asked for it. What else do you know about this son? John says it would be a lot more pleasant to be with the younger son than the older son. You want to get a beer with the younger son. You want to hang out with him. Okay. Perfectly imperfect. All right. So that's a little more on the younger son and the older son. What else do you know about the older son? This is so like he's like Martha, right? Which is great. You're weaving this with other scripture. Martha and Mary, the two sisters, and Martha who is working, and so his brother goes away and takes half the inheritance, but he's still doing sort of all the work and doing double time that whole time, and saying what never forgetting that his brother could have been picking up the other side of that basket instead of him carrying it all alone. Yeah. He's self-righteous. He's like a Pharisee. So you're seeing the response of the parable to the question. He's like a Pharisee who's been keeping all the rules. That there's an honesty to doing the things you know are the right things to do. And I knew I wasn't supposed to run off and spend this in dissolute living. But then there is something we can miss when we know what the rules are to keep. We can sometimes not have the bandwidth or give the time to reach for what could maybe even be added to that or let go. It's not the worst thing to be following the rules, but it has its own pitfalls. Yeah. You're saying that to an oldest child too, so I hear it. So he didn't ask for a party, but couldn't his father have noticed that maybe he'd like a party, have asked, there's a family dynamic. It's not all just on the son, right? So I won't go to the father in just a second. One other thing I noticed, I was thinking of us returning from kind of the pandemic desert, returning to a closer community, and that it seems, which connects to a sermon a couple weeks ago, I guess, about we just don't want to come back and make nice church again. Not just do it because we should. And in some ways, that's a kind of a laying down of the working like a slave. We're not. And so there's something that we, I think, as a community are kind of laying down that this brother carries, which is, I just find wonderful. Sorry, but didn't give it up, but he didn't ask. The works and grace, these two figures, one who is earning righteousness, earning favor, earning love by doing the works, and the other who knows the value of doing works. Frankly, right? He's spent the days sweating in the field and sees the fruit of that. And then this other person who has come to learn the value of receiving love unearned, of receiving love only because he's returned and learns that the Father will love no matter what. That is it a reformation? Yeah, well, but those two themes picked up very strongly in the Reformation in the 1500s. But they're also in the letter of James, which is to another ancient text. So that theme is definitely a long theme for us. And Rob. Yeah, you can see them already anticipating the next argument and wanting to kind of block it out for Dad. How it's going to play out. Well, this makes me turn to the Father, who, and I think it's possible that in interrogating the Father's position, I may be breaking the parable. The parable seems to have been given about the children, but to turn to the Father, here's a father who seems to be a little bit of an enabler. The son asks for half the inheritance, and so he gives it to him, like as though he didn't know he was going to run off and squander it all. And then when this younger son comes home, the older son's still working out in the field. The dad doesn't even send a runner, like to go tell him that the party's starting and what's happening. He has to come home finish his day's work in the field and then come home and find the party. But also this father who's so good at loving on the spot, who does, it's unannounced that his son is coming home, but he sees him in the field and immediately is filled with compassion. Get the best robe, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And then when his older son just rages, he's immediately ready, even in the tension of that moment, to put a hand on his shoulder and say, not this son of mine, this brother of yours, to be doing reconciling between his kids, even in that moment. And to say, to be able to speak those words, everything I have is yours. So he's very ready to love. What else? What am I missing in this father? What else do you know about him? Judy. He's full of grief, and so there's this breaking open of the grief and the love that would have been hiding inside it and can just pour out again. Yeah. I just was hearing a radio story of a family finding their uncle who they'd been sundered from at World War II. After decades, they found him. Shane. He sees his son while he's still far off. So somehow he's kept his eyes up, waiting, hoping. So there's a constancy in the Father. It's all there for the asking, from the beginning of the story to the end. Yeah. That the Father is carrying a legacy and can see, sort of like you're saying, has a wider view on the situation, that he's carrying love in and handing it down, and almost at the end of the day, he wants to make sure the thing that gets handed down is the love. Someone at the 8 a.m. service said, I noticed neither of these sons has a prefrontal cortex yet. And maybe the dad does, right? He can see the need for what is most transmitted at the end of the day. And Rebecca. Is this a merely reactive father, or is he actually quite wise and wants his children to learn for themselves? Can maybe see what each needs to work through and provides them the space to work through it? Thank you.
It does strike me that institutions need the workers, they need to keep things in Judaism, the Pharisees, and all the people that held the law, and yet then wasn't open to Gentiles and the people who lacked the automatic favor. And so that is the grace piece. But in this, it doesn't give respect to the pieces that keep it going. And that's the conflict, because I would say most institutions value the pieces that keep it going and not necessarily the uncomfortable pieces that are about grace.
It's sort of a story of institutions, and then the things that pass through an institution and then come around again and bring life, but don't keep it going week to week. And the interplay between those, how the Pharisees are keeping the institution. What about these sinners who weren't at temple, and now they're showing up to eat and you're eating with them? I thought if this was told today, it would be a trilogy, and you'd get one book or one movie about the redemption arc of each of these three characters. And I thank God that Jesus was not a novelist. Parables are much shorter. But also, I think he was intentional in telling them in parables because he didn't finish the story. He didn't close the arc. He meant for us to enter the story just as we've just done, and for us to finish the acts of redemption. He intended for the Pharisees who were sitting there and the scribes to say to themselves, wait, am I the son who's been raging, but who has all the love already? And I thought, well, it seems like the whole story is happening in kind of an open setting. Are the sinners who are at table with him, are they all there hearing the same story? Or maybe they're saying to themselves, am I as off the path as that guy who was eating with the pigs? And I even wondered if Jesus is even sort of talking with God at the same time while he's doing this instruction and sort of saying to God, like, you kind of put us in a crazy situation, God, with all this free choice and having to figure out love this way. And then, of course, the gospel writer who puts it down on paper, very self-consciously passing it on to us, to whoever will read it, that to say, now your turn. Now come on into the story. Where's the redemption? Come and land for you. In service of finding yourself in the story, I invite you, we've been doing this, but I invite you to really picture Jesus of Nazareth sitting across from you and inviting you to hear yourself in the story, inviting you to hear what God has for you from this parable. I've led us in deconstructing the parable a bit as a kind of practice in what it can look like to find yourself in this parable, to find yourself in any parable. And now I'd like to kind of reconstruct it, bring it back together a little, and maybe make the case for it being top 10. So to bring it back and bring back whatever you've heard from Jesus in this parable, whatever you hear about God in your life, bring it back to the kind of the story in its own terms, and just point out kind of 4 high points in the story that maybe you can weave yourself into. Number 1, Jesus ate with folks who did not rate. Fact. If he was here today, you shouldn't be surprised at where he might be. Number 2, Jesus taught that God embraces with love everyone who comes stumbling towards him, even those who have lived hard, even those who are suffering with the consequences of their own choices. We had to rejoice because my child who was lost has been found. 3, God reclothes those who come to him. A new robe, a ring on the finger, sandals on the feet. These are signs of a child being reborn. It's a baptismal image, right? Reclothed. Reclothed because God desires, God's love desires to reclothe. And because of God's choice and God's desire, our shame is gone. And in its place, there's a party. And number 4, God expects that all the sisters and brothers, those who mucked things up living wild, and those who worked their butts off on the farm, end up at the same party. Just one party for all of them together. And if they're willing to accept his embrace, then they're in the party. Top 10, maybe.